DS Lite. I'm just kidding, we can't end the video that soon. Okay, and there is a few other arguments to be made. So, the DS versus the DSi. Now, there's a few different ways we could spin this. We could do the original fat DS versus the DSi, in which case, yeah, the DSi wins all day. So I figured instead of doing just the DS versus the DSi, because that'd be a pretty open shut case, you know what I mean? Like, as much as I love that original fat DS, you know, the buttons feel great, I really like the form factor of it. Like, it's actually a really comfortable device despite the fact that it is a bit bulkier. My main gripe with that system is just how dark that screen is. But when we go on to talk about the DS Lite versus the DSi, that's where things get a bit more interesting. Now, this particular DS, if you saw my most recent video talking about the unfortunate flaw that this DS has, where it looks great on the surface, and in fact, even when I turn this puppy on, I mean, you open it, like, everything looks great about this system, between the screens, the speakers, the buttons. However, the screen has some sort of strange defect where it motion blurs and screen goes so bad to an extent that I haven't seen on even a Game Boy before. And just to make sure I wasn't going crazy, I compared it to both my DSi as well as my sister's DS Lite, and yeah, I can confirm that there is definitely a defect here with this DS Lite. So now I'm at the point where I'm either gonna replace the top screen with a screen off of eBay, which I have done before. It is a bit trickier to do because there is some other, you know, soldering and stuff involved compared to just replacing like a bottom screen. But at the same time, I just feel like, I don't know, do I really want to do that with like a third-party screen? I think I'd rather wait until I find that listing. You know what I mean? Like, the listing, where the screens, you know, I've kind of given up on finding a pure white, no yellow DS Lite screen, because in the year 2024, the likelihood of that happening is next to none. But I want to find a screen with minimal yellowing on the top screen and top and bottom screen. Preferably, I would like a mix of the top screen being pure white and then the bottom screen being maybe ever so slightly yellow at worst, but I'm going for like pure white if I can, and just overall being in generally good condition. I don't need the bumpers to be in the best condition because I have bumpers I can replace if need be. I don't need the buttons to be in best condition because I have replacement rubbers and button rubbers and stuff like that, and buttons themselves. But hey, we'll get there when we get there. I'll find that perfect listing any day. You know what? Someday, hopefully. Anyway, so I guess where do we kick things off? Do we kick things off with the DS Lite? Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so since we're kind of excluding the original DS, since that's very irrelevant to the conversation, it would be a completely unfair comparison. The DS Lite released in 2006, and it is a very good device. You know, it's very comfortable in the hands, and it retained basically, no, literally all the features from the original DS while adding on to it. You know, you had the adjustable brightness, and instead of the buttons being more, I guess, like kind of clicky like the original ones were, they felt more almost analog in a way. Like, they obviously weren't analog buttons, but they were a bit more mushy, almost kind of like a PS2 or PS3 or PS1's controller, where you push it down and it feels like there's almost like a gradual progression rather than just hitting it and that's that. There's like a gradual progression between pressing it and not pressing it. It also has a bigger battery life. They changed the placement of the stylus, so then it's just a bit more, I don't know, a bit more accessible or just a bit easier to grab in the middle of gameplay. I always prefer out of like any DS system, I would say that on like the 2DS, the DSi, the DS Lite here, like I always loved that placement. And just like right here, you just grab it, you just pull it out, you're straight into action. Always loved that placement for the buttons, and overall, yeah, you know, the DS Lite is just an amazing system. I mean, the amount of hours that I put into my original DS back in the day is, I mean, I don't even know if there's a number that can explain that amount of hours. It was a lot. However, there was obviously always a few growing pains with the system. While it had such amazing features that as I just listed off, including backwards compatibility with the Game Boy Advance, there was also this funny situation where if you turn the device on and you have a game insert, well, this example, I was going to show it to you guys, but it's just pure white when the light's right there. But if you have a game inside of it and then you try to take it out even while the system's on, it'll just have a heart attack. It'll freeze up. You got to turn it off. You got to turn it back on again. If you go into your settings and you try to just, you know, change the clock, you have to turn it off and on again. Not even that. If you just go into the settings period, you're going to have to turn the system on and off again. I'm not even kidding. And then anytime that you replace the battery, you have to go through the whole initiation process again, which is kind of interesting because you would think it would be tied to the system, but it's tied to the battery for some reason. Are those things make it or break it? Not even close. Those are just small little nitpicks or slight inconveniences, because when it comes to turning off and on a DS, I mean, we've all done it before. You flick the switch, it's on and off in a matter of like 2 seconds. It's literally nothing. But that being said, by the time 2008 rolled around and we had other systems out on the market like the PSP or the iPhone, I mean, like, at that point, you know, you had systems where, in the case of like the iPhone, you could just click the home button and you could go into your settings. You had all these different apps you could access. It was like a whole new world there. And even with the PSP, you know, you had the whole XMB there, which was essentially, you know, like the same thing that we would see on the PS3, except, you know, on the PSP. You could download games straight to the system. You could store all sorts of files on the PSP. So by the time 2008 rolled around, Nintendo was like, all right, you know, the DS Lite, it's doing us good. We're selling, you know, dozens, hundreds of millions of units. But even as something as perfect as the DS Lite could use a slight, I don't want to say improvement necessarily, but just a, you know, a nice little modern fresh up, just kind of put some makeup on the thing, and that's where we got the DSi. Now, this isn't the DSi that, because I'm assuming most of you watching this are probably in America, you probably haven't seen this specific color before, and that is because this is a Japanese exclusive glossy red DSi. I love flexing this thing any chance I get. We did get a matte red one, but yeah, Japan was the only ones to get this real nice glossy one, and yeah, I absolutely love this color. But anyway, there was a few changes made with the DSi, namely the fact that it now comes with cameras. Yeah, not only does it have a back-facing camera, but it also has a front-facing camera if you want to take selfies, and then, you know, when it comes to the back camera, I mean, when it comes to the DSi versus the DS Lite, I mean, your mom, she can shoot her OnlyFans videos on the DSi, but she can't do that on the DS Lite, can she? And with that also means that the microphone from the DS and the DS Lite has returned, and you're able to make, like, voice recordings and such on here, and it's really cool because not only can you do these cool little, like, videos and pictures and voice recordings, but of course Nintendo put their Nintendo spin on it. You're able to morph the voice recordings to make them all sound weird. You can like mess with the pictures and videos and such, and you know, it's really cool. And obviously with all that, you need a way to actually store that stuff, and on the side of the device, now we have an SD card slot, because if you want to use an SD card on a DS Lite, I'm sorry, the only way you're doing it is with a R4 card, and then you pop an SD in there, but obviously even that's not the same thing, because that's really just to store games and such. Obviously there's other programs for you to, you know, look at pictures and such with Homebrew and other applications, but when it comes to just like a, you know, outside of the modification realm, when we're just looking at the vanilla-based system, yeah, you know, now we have a way to actually do that officially. You put that in there, you can store your voice recordings, your videos, you know, your photos and stuff like that. And furthermore, you can actually put photos and such on there, and then put it into your DSi and look at it on there. And furthermore, I would say that when it comes to homebrewing a DS Lite or a DSi, homebrewing and modding a DSi is, it's not hard. It's not even close to hard. You can do it in like 5, maybe 10 minutes. It's just that it takes more steps than a DS Lite, because for this, you have to actually go through and do certain things and navigate certain parts of it, and yes, this is modded, because I can't speak Japanese yet. I'm getting there. Watashi wa Nissan desu. So, you know, I'm still in the beginning stages. Watashi wa akai ringo ga hoshi desu. I just said that I want a red apple. So, yeah, you know, still learning some of the basic stuff. Thankfully, I've learned all of the Japanese particles already, or most of them, most of the conversational ones. You know, you got like your wa, ga, o, ka, all that stuff. So, you know, I've learned about a good 14, 15 of them that are used commonly. So, I'm making good progress. Right now, I'm just in that awkward stage where I need to spend the next 2 or 3 months expanding my vocabulary. I've been learning basic stuff like shiawase da, which means like I'm happy, or like boku ga baka da, which means I'm an idiot. But anyways, with the power of modding it, unfortunately, you cannot change the region of a DSi even when you mod it. You can, I mean, you can. There's a way to like patch the NAND and all that, but really what you'd want to do is just get Twilight menu and make it so that the system automatically boots into that, and then just change the language to English, and then it's literally perfect, because there's not really any region locking on DSi. That's where it gets a little tricky. So for when you're running games off a Twilight menu, it literally does not menu. So or does not matter. So when it comes to like the DSiWare games, which would be region locked, I mean, there's not actually an official way to get them anyways nowadays outside of Twilight menu, really. So that whole conversation is kind of irrelevant, at least when it comes to like you know, like DSiWare and such. But if you're not planning to mod a system and you want to get a Japanese one, just keep in mind that if the game has a serial tag or whatever, like a region code of NTR, it's fine, it's region free, it'll work on the DSi. But if it has a code of TWL, then it will be region locked, so just keep your eyes peeled on that. But again, if you're modding the system like I did, you can run literally anything on here, so it doesn't matter. I already tested it. I played the DSi exclusive and DSiWare games. no issues there. Anyhow, yeah, with that SD card being inside of the DSi now means you actually have onboard storage to keep some games, and while there wasn't ever actually like official retail games put up on there, like, you know, you weren't going onto the DSi shop and downloading Mario Kart DS or New Super Mario Bros. Or anything, there was a ton of DSiWare. Now granted, there's a conversation to be had about the fact that a lot of DSiWare was games that were already released but stripped back versions of them, like Plants vs. Zombies released on DS, like, you know, I have it on my DS Lite here, but, you know, I mean, it was like the full Plants vs. Zombies experience there. But the DSiWare version of it was only the adventure mode. Now, that wasn't every game, obviously. You know, Shantae is one of, like, the go-to examples of one of the best DSiWare games of all time, and of course, you had many other experiences like that where people were genuinely trying to take advantage of the hardware and of the service and release some really cool games that would stand the test of time. But then you had other ones where, like, Need for Speed Nitro X or something like that. It's literally just like Need for Speed from the DS, but again, paired back with less features, and it's just like, okay, well, what are you doing here? Like, it's sort of like back in the day, if you guys, you know, were on the App Store with, like, the, you know, the iPod Touch or the older iPhones or iPads back then, when they had light versions of certain apps where you could go in there, and I remember one of them was Iron Man 2 Lite. You could play, like, the first 2 missions of the game, or the first mission of the game if you downloaded the Lite demo or whatever, and then after that, then you could, if you spent, like, $5, you could get the full game, which I have I'm sure that my Apple ID is worth so much money. You have no idea how many of those games I have, even though those games are technically delisted and not even like available nowadays. Since I purchased them, they are still in my account, and since I have like an iPod Touch 4th gen and an iPad Mini 1, I can still play all of those games from back in the day, like the RE4 port, Dead Space Mobile, you know, like all those other games on there that have since been delisted, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that's essentially what a lot of DSiWare kind of, you know, came down to, unfortunately. Nintendo themselves were kind of guilty of that with some of the you know, brain age stuff, but, you know, I mean, at the same time, it was still cool that that service was available, and there was enough, like, substantial or exclusive content to DSiWare where I would say that if you've never experienced DSiWare, just do your research as to what games are actually legitimate DSiWare games and which ones are just like demos, more or less, and pick out the ones that are real games and play them that way. Otherwise, just get an R4 and play the full games that way. But seriously, there is a lot of content on DSiWare, and unfortunately, when talking to people, not only did not as many people have a DSi, obviously since it came out 2 years after the DS Lite, and the DS Lite was always the more affordable option, but, you know, Wi-Fi still wasn't that widespread of a thing back then, you know? I knew plenty of kids back in, like, you know, 2008 when this would have came out, where they didn't even really have Wi-Fi at the time. Like, sure, they might have had internet at their house to, like, hook up to their computer or landline or whatever, but not full-blown wireless Wi-Fi. And the only reason that I'm going on and on about this whole DSiWare thing is because this is about to get really tricky and is going to play a huge part in the next talking piece, which is where things are going to get controversial, because believe it or not, yeah, the DS Lite versus DSi conversation becomes quite heated online. Now, there's also, like, the DSi XL we could talk about, but I'm not really talking about individual models today. Today, I just kind of want to talk about each system on their own. What, like, which one should you go for here? Okay, so with the DS Lite, now, one thing that I touched on before is the fact that it has full backwards compatibility with the Game Boy Advance, not emulation. It just runs off native hardware, so it's going to be the same as if you played it on a Game Boy Advance. There is some slight differences, like, obviously there might be, like, a frame delay. Some people have talked about some possible ghosting that wasn't necessarily there on, like, the actual GBA hardware back in the day. But for the most part, it's going to be, like, 99.9% identical to the Game Boy Advance games you would have played back then, and just the fact that it's there as an option is pretty awesome. And again, through the modern landscape, as much as I want to say that is a selling point, you can do the exact same thing on the DSi once you load it up with mods and emulators. I can play Game Boy Advance games on my DSi or my DS Lite, both through the R4 cartridges, by the way. Well, this one doesn't have an R4. This one's just literally booted up on the SD card, so there's even a conversation to be had that maybe this would run better than the R4 does. But modding aside, just looking at the vanilla systems, yeah, this one actually has the capability of playing those GBA games. Whereas the DSi has the ability to play not only DSiWare games, but also a few exclusive, just full-stop DSi games, including like Photo Showdown and the One Hair Salon game and System Flaw. I will say, out of all those games, Photo Showdown is one of those games where, even though it's a little gimmicky, I got a soft spot. I got a soft spot for it. I love that game. Not to mention the fact that, as we had touched on previously, the DSi actually has an OS that is worth a dang. Now, when you're playing a video game console, you're going to be spending 99.9% of the time playing the video game, but I would say that, honestly, the ambience and the mood that the console sets from the moment you turn it on, whether you're talking about the PS2 where you turn it on and it does the whole zoom in on the towers depending on how many saves you have on your memory card, or the GameCube's little dance that the cube does, or the Wii U, for example. This is one of my favorite examples to point to, where as much as I love the Nintendo Switch, I love the Wii U more as a console. Not talking about games or anything like that, because there's definitely an argument to be made that basically every Wii U game is on Switch. Not every Wii U game, but almost at this point. But there's just something about when I turn on the Switch, it feels a little cold, lonely, and sterile, whereas when I turn on the Wii U, I'm immediately transported to the Wii U's realm, to the Wii U's universe, where, you know, the music is going, you see the Wii U's menu popping up, it sort of just looks like an HD version of the Wii, depending on what screen you have things set up on one screen you have the games pop up, and on the other ones you have all the Mii's running in, you know, just like storming in, you see what everybody's up to, and there's just something about that where it really helps to set the tone before you play a game. You know what I mean? Like, okay, let's say you go online, you go on Tinder, and you find this smoking hot dude or girl or whatever, and you go and you take them on a date, and by the end of the night, things are getting real hot and steamy. You know what I mean? You get home, and you're just trying to set the mood. And obviously, you know, everything's consensual here. You know, you both are feeling it, you're both getting into it. Now, and right before you start doing the hanky-panky schmanky, would you rather have things just be cold and sterile with, like, hospital lights going overhead? Do you really just want it to be like a blank white room with nothing on the walls, a blank white floor with nothing on the floor? As I mentioned before, I'm talking the bright white hospital/school lights, and then you're just sitting on, like, a plain white couch, and then you just kind of do your schmanky-panky there? Or would you rather turn it on to really get the mood going? You have like a nice level of lighting. The lights are basically all turned out, but you have candles going all around the room. You got, like, I don't know, maybe like Careless Whisper playing in the background. I don't know if that's really a hanky-panky schmanky song, but I mean, hey, it might get somebody in the mood out there. I ain't never gonna dance again. You know what I mean? Like, you're really getting in the mood there. Like, I mean, come on. Oh, and then you lay him down on that nice, like, maroon, dark red couch or bed or whatever, and then you start doing your thing. Like, which one sounds like the better mood? You know what I'm saying? Was this a horrible analogy for talking about playing video games and turning on a console? Probably, but it's what came to my mind. And for me, when I turn on the Nintendo Switch, I think of that blank, white, bright hospital room. Whereas when I turn on the Wii U, it's more akin to that, I ain't never gonna dance again. And honestly, I'm not saying that one OS here between the DSi or the DS Lite is even necessarily better, because they're both great in their own ways. Honestly, if I'm gonna be honest, even though I would say that the DSi is more a more functional OS, and, you know, the thing doesn't, like, almost explode if you simply try to take out a game or go into the settings while the system is on. You know, I mean, there's so much nostalgia for the DS. You know, you turn it on, you got that ding-ding-ding-ding-ding, you see the Nintendo thing pop up, you click into the screen, you just click on your game, and that's that. And I feel like there's something to be said about simplicity and accessibility here, where I would say that the DS Lite is much more of an easily accessible system. You turn it on, it literally tells you, touchscreen to continue. The first thing you see, games, PictoChat, download, play, and then you know, the thing at the bottom for the Game Boy Advance game. It's all about the games, all the focus is there. Whereas when you turn on the DSi, your eyes kind of wander a bit. It's like, okay, sure, my game's the first option, but wait, what's this? You got the photo app, and then voice recordings, and then wait, I can record videos, and okay, wait, I'm going to the settings and do, you know what I mean? Like, there's a bit more to it there. That being said, if you're just looking for a device that feels a bit more modern with a, you know, just something that isn't gonna explode if you try to just do something ever so simple on the main menu, the DSi would obviously win in that category, full stop. But again, I have so much nostalgia for the DS Lite that it's kind of hard to put a thing there. We're not really going down by category, saying who wins in what category. We're just kind of going over the systems as a whole to see who wins at all the end of this. So then we talk about the game specifically, or I guess the way that these consoles run certain games. So again, not talking about modded stuff, because when it comes to modding, I mean, you can basically do the exact same thing on either of these systems, barring the DSiWare, which will be a talking point here in a moment. But yeah, you know, so on their surface, basically, they're gonna run the exact same things as far as DS games go outside of the DSi exclusive games. However, obviously, the DS Lite has the GBA capability, and that's where things get a little funny. On paper, the DS Lite has access to more games as a vanilla system unmodded. That being said, the DSi, considering the fact that it has an OS and all that, they needed to do a spec bump before releasing the DSi, because if you try to put all these features onto the same specs that they had during the DS Lite, yeah, it probably would have been running pretty slow if it even would have ran at all. So, you know, they like doubled up like the memory and boosted the CPU speed and stuff like that, just so then things could be running, you know, a bit smoother, a bit faster, and just, you know, function. Which does mean that even if incrementally so, games are going to run better on the DSi. That is a talking point that I haven't seen people mention that often, but yeah, I mean, it's very easy to like find comparisons either online or just do it for yourself. Like, boot up a game that's relatively, I wouldn't say challenging for the DS to run, because there wasn't many games like that where I was like, oh man, the DS is really struggling here, but you know, just find some games, play them on the DS Lite, and then play them on the DSi, and I guarantee, at least from my personal experience, there's been plenty of times where there's certain games where, even with official cartridges, because I know sometimes with R4s, you know, there could be a conversation of like, hey, maybe the SD read speeds are off, maybe there's some slowdown because of that. No, even playing official cartridges, there's been times where the DS Lite will slow down in certain spots, but the DSi will do no such thing, and it'll breeze through at a clean 30 to 60 FPS, no frame drops in sight, not to mention the fact that the screens, relatively speaking, build quality overall do tend to be better. Now, when you get a good quality DS Lite and DSi screen side by side, and they're both crystal white, there's no motion blurring artifacts or defects like mine has. You know, everything is just basically perfect for the most part, but even then, when you're comparing the DS Lite to the DSi, mostly, like, overall, especially nowadays, if you're trying to find one to buy, the DSi, more times than not, will have screens that have not only held up better in terms of yellowing, but will probably just look better overall. Again, just simply due to age. At the time when they released, probably would have been hard to tell, but even then, I mean, the DSi still has crisper screens overall, or at least there's just something about the quality of the screens. Maybe it's just because they're ever so slightly bigger. Granted, they have the exact same resolution as the DS Lite, so in some cases, the games may even look a bit sharper on the DS Lite just because it's a smaller screen with the same amount of pixels, but the DSi has always looked crisper in a way, if that makes sense. It's really hard to explain. The DS Lite in a way looks sharper, whereas the DSi has a certain crispness to where, you know, the screen's only 0.25 inches larger, but that 0.25 really helps to put a magnifying glass on all of the small and fine details in the games, if that makes sense. And some of you out there may be able to see where I'm kind of going with this. So again, not only will some of those base DS games just work better overall on the DSi, but it has access to all the DSi games that we spoke about before. So this is where we start to kind of get towards the end of this thing here. One final thing worth noting is that the DSi also does technically have a worse battery life than the DS Lite. The DS Lite can last for basically till the end of time. That thing's battery life is near infinite, whereas the DSi, I don't know the exact number, but I mean, it still lasts for such a long time. It's still like 6 to 8 hours or something crazy like that, maybe more. I don't know the exact number, so I'm sorry if that's off, but you know, the DS Lite's like, I don't know what, like 14, 16, I don't know what the actual number is, but it's absolutely insane. But when you're comparing the DSi to the DS Lite, I feel like there is one thing that comes to mind. I'm sorry, my hair. I definitely need to cut all this off at some point, but winter's coming up, so I mean, I kind of want to just keep all the fluff so I can stay warm during the cold months, and then I'll cut it next spring or something. When it comes to the DSi versus the DS Lite, do you want more options, right? Do you want to be able to play all the DS games as well as Game Boy Advance games and have that all in one system? Or do you want the system that is going to hone in on one specific library and do it all not only better than the other option, but also just give you more options as well because of the DSIWare and some of the exclusive games that we had mentioned before? It's that classic situation, I would say, of jack of all, master of none, and then really honing in and mastering one thing. But that, at the same time, that doesn't really feel accurate or really feel truthful, if I'm going to be honest, because, I mean, let's be real. It's a very slight spec bump that this thing got, and the difference in performance is going to be negligible to the human eye most of the time. Sure, there's going to be a few examples, like I mentioned, where some games will have frame dips here, but it won't dip here, and there's some games that actually are specifically Nintendo DSi enhanced, where you're going to have access to all the features here that you wouldn't have on here. But at the same time, if I specifically, personally, had to choose, as much as it may sound like I've been leaning towards the DSi this whole time, talking about all the improvements this thing brought to the table, talking about all the DS games, I would go with the DS Lite. Now, again, it's one of those situations where, despite the fact that, yes, the DSi is going to technically run a lot of DS games better overall in terms of performance or specs or the exclusive DS games that it actually has access to, the DS Lite, I'm gonna be honest, it's definitely a nostalgia thing, right? I have so much nostalgia for this system, just turning it on, the form factor, the screen, the size of the screen, the speakers, the placement of everything, the simplicity of everything, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of nostalgia tied to the sheer simplicity of it, because that's where a lot of our nostalgia comes from. Not only were those times great in the past, but a huge part of nostalgia is just having a longing for those simpler times. And I feel like the DS Lite is the perfect example of that, where it's so simple. You just turn it on, it's all about the games, whereas the DSi, you have a few more distractions along the way to getting to your games. But beyond all that, again, not only the performance was never an issue in the DS Lite anyway, especially since all the games were made with this device in mind, with the DSi only being like, it's not even a situation of like, oh, it's like an Xbox One X enhanced thing where like, sure, the Xbox One version, or in this case the DS Lite version, is passable, but the DSi or One X version is so much better, higher resolution, max frame rate. Like, no, it's nothing like that. We're talking very incremental upgrades, if literally even any at all, in 90% of the game's library. And beyond all that, this thing has a Game Boy Advance slot. And while the DSi does have a few exclusive games with the DSiWare and the DSi exclusives, we're talking about thousands of games that you can play with this slot alone. Whereas that, we're talking like, what, a few hundred? And plus, it's the Game Boy Advance. One of the best handhelds, let alone consoles of all time. I absolutely love the Game Boy Advance. I'll have to do like a full retrospective or versus video or I miss Game Boy Advance video one day, because I have so much nostalgia for that system. It is such an amazing handheld. But yeah, between the two, I definitely go DS Lite, just because, again, not only does it have access to the full DS library, but, I mean, you also got that Game Boy Advance slot, and there's just something super nostalgic about this form factor, playing the games on this device. That being said, if you decided to go with the DSi, I could not fault you there, because this is a situation where if you can only pick one, I would say the DS, just go with the DS Lite, because it also has the pathway to play Game Boy Advance games. But if you're looking for the absolute best way to play DS games and you don't care about the Game Boy Advance slot, because maybe you already have a Game Boy Advance, maybe you already have an emulator for that, maybe you already have an analog pocket, maybe you have a way to play Game Boy Advance games and you don't care about that at all. You just want the best experience possible when playing DS games. I would probably say go with the DSi, because again, you're going to get that slightly better performance in all the exclusive games and all the DSiWare, though it will require modding on the DSiWare front, since that stuff isn't actually available to download from the official Nintendo store anymore, since it's been shut down for many years. However, it won't necessarily always be the best way to play DS games, because the Nintendo DS and the DS Lite, some games for this system, utilize the GBA slot in order to use certain accessories, the most famous of which being the Guitar Hero grip. So if you get the DSi, you're not going to be playing Guitar Hero. And as somebody that grew up during the 2000s, I can tell you right now, I need my Guitar Hero. Let me tell you something. Even seeing those colored buttons at the bottom of the screen on Guitar Hero games is enough to send me into nostalgic tears. The amount of nostalgia and love that I have for Guitar Hero cannot be expressed into words. That being said, that's definitely part of my bias here, because like playing Guitar Hero on the DS, it's genuinely pretty gnarly. It's a lot of fun, and not having the ability to do that on the DSi, you might think I'm joking or something, but like, between that and the various other games that also utilize the Game Boy Advance slot, was it many games? No, I'm talking like maybe a dozen at most out of the DS's thousands of games library that actually utilize that feature. But again, it's another situation where it's just sort of another knock against the DSi, because while yes, most games are going to work here, for example, like Guitar Hero, you're still going to want to keep the DS Lite on hand. And the fact that I even have to say that, I mean, it's one of those things where now that I'm looking at it, like, I keep going back and forth, but I feel like for the overall ultimate package, even having access to all of the games in the DS library, since you are going to need some accessories to even play DS Lite games in the first place, like Guitar Hero, I'd say just go for the DS Lites and you have access to all of those games. But at the same time, are you really going to have access to all the DS games? Because then you're going to be missing out on the DSi stuff. But at the same time, that's DSi stuff, whereas we're talking about DS stuff. But isn't it all the same? I don't know. At this point, I'm just starting to run in circles, ain't I? Anyways, yeah, I'll shut up now and I'll just kind of leave this with you, because like I said before, man, if I keep going, I'm literally just gonna end up running in circles around myself, because now my brain's starting to get going. What is the ultimate way to play DS games? I mean, if you're looking for the ultimate way to play DS games, you go DSi, right? But what about Guitar Hero? I mean, and other games that use accessories. I mean, you're gonna need the DS Lite for the whole Nintendo. You know what? Screw this video. Go buy a DSi, buy a DSi XL, buy a DS, buy a DS Lite, buy a 2DS, buy a 3DS, buy a 3DS XL, buy a new 3DS XL, buy a new 3DS, and buy a new 2DS XL. Then you can play everything, no problem. Go buy a Virtual Boy while you're at it, because if you're gonna spend that much money, might as well spend some more. One random side note that has nothing to do with the video, I just wanted you guys, do you guys remember those switch and carry cases back in the day? Check out this one. This is like the coolest thing literally ever. I've been keeping my DS Lite in here, and just not only do I love Zelda Phantom Hourglass, but I love switch and carry cases, and more specifically, I love this specific case, and I'm never getting rid of this. This is like one of the most prized parts of my possession, or one of my most prized possessions in my like video game collection right now. I love this case. It is beautiful. I know there's more out there like this, and I need to get them like ASAP. I'm pretty sure there's one for like Mario, so if I can find like a red Mario one, especially since like red's like my favorite color, I'd get that in a heartbeat. I wanted to get one for my DSi, but unfortunately, I put my DSi inside of that switch and carry case, and it fits, but it's really snug, so I didn't want to do that. Instead, I've just been keeping my DSi in this big bulky case, because this fits upwards of like DSi XLs. I don't know, I just really don't want to risk, you know, having this thing be all squeezed up by the case. That just seems like a recipe for disaster or damage in the long run. But anyway, as always, massive shout out, thank you to all the Patreons and channel members. Thank you to all of you in the low baller tier, and every shout out, thank you to all the big baller tier. My last game, be that man, and they shout out on the G tier, run events on the G scroll. Thank you guys so much, you guys are literal legends. I love you. Have an amazing day, stay beautiful. I love you all. Peace.